The restaurant had gone completely silent. An older black man in janitorial coveralls set down his mop and began walking toward the woman who was still mid-tirade. Her finger pointed accusingly at the young waitress whose hands had started to tremble. He removed his work gloves slowly, deliberately, one finger at a time, and his entire posture shifted. Shoulders back. Head high. The shuffle of a maintenance worker replaced by the confident stride of someone who commanded rooms. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made the woman stop mid-sentence. She turned, ready to dismiss whoever dared interrupt her public humiliation of the staff. She had no idea that the janitor she was about to wave away owned the very ground she stood on, that the worn coveralls concealed the man who'd built this place from nothing, that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how we got here, to this moment of reckoning, we need to go back 3 hours earlier, to when the Golden Terrace was just settling into its usual Tuesday afternoon rhythm, and nobody had any idea how dramatically this ordinary day was about to unfold. The Golden Terrace sat on the corner of Martin Luther Street and Fifth Avenue like an old friend who'd seen it all. 42 years of history lived in those walls. 3 recessions, 2 pandemics, and countless transformations of the neighborhood around it. The restaurant wasn't fancy. The vinyl booths had been reupholstered twice. The tile floor showed its age. But step inside and you'd see why it mattered. Photographs lined every available wall space. Little League teams from 1987. A couple celebrating their 50th anniversary in 2003. Graduation parties, birthday celebrations, proposals. Decades of community memories preserved in fading snapshots behind glass. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a living scrapbook of the neighborhood itself. Maya Richardson had been part of this story for 8 months now. At 23, she was working her way through community college, taking business classes in the mornings and pulling double shifts on weekends. She had dreams. Real ones. Maybe open her own cafe someday. Maybe work in hospitality management. For now, she showed up early, stayed late, and treated every customer like they mattered. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the lunch rush had just ended. Maya was wiping down table 7, humming softly to herself. In the corner, an older man in coveralls mopped the floor with practiced efficiency, practically invisible to the departing customers. The name patch on his uniform read Ernest. He'd been there all through lunch service, working methodically, listening to everything. Before we continue, if you appreciate stories about everyday heroes standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. The door chimed, and she walked in like she was doing the restaurant a favor. Patricia Hendricks was the kind of woman who announced herself without saying a word. Designer handbag, this season's collection, though she'd charged it to a nearly maxed-out credit card. Hair coiffed to perfection at a salon she could no longer afford. Sunglasses that stayed on indoors. Her entire appearance screamed success, but it was all scaffolding around a crumbling foundation. Behind her, a boy of maybe 9 or 10 trailed silently, eyes glued to a tablet, already trained to be invisible when his mother was in one of her moods. "Table for 2, Patricia announced without looking up from her phone. Not a question. Not a request. Maya smiled warmly, gathering menus. Of course, right this way. She led them to a booth near the window where afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass. Patricia slid into her seat and immediately resumed scrolling, barely acknowledging Maya's presence. The boy sat across from her, never once looking up. What Maya couldn't see was the mounting desperation behind Patricia's carefully maintained facade. Her husband had left 3 weeks ago. The mortgage was 2 months behind. She was clinging to the lifestyle she'd built her entire identity around with fingernails that were starting to bleed. And when people are drowning, they sometimes pull others down with them. When Maya returned to take their order, Patricia didn't even lower her phone. Salmon. Exactly 4 minutes per side. Sauce on the side, not touching the fish. Vegetables steamed but absolutely not soft. No garnish touching anything on the plate. She finally looked up, her eyes cold. Can you handle that, or do I need to write it down for you? Maya's smile never wavered. I've got it. And for your son. Chicken fingers. Plain. 15 minutes later, Maya carried out 2 plates, both prepared exactly as requested. The salmon had been timed to the second. The vegetables were perfectly steamed with just enough bite. The sauce sat in a small ramekin, not a drop touching the fish. The boy's chicken fingers were golden and plain. Patricia took 1 bite. Just 1. Then her face transformed into something ugly. This is completely wrong, she announced, her voice loud enough that heads turned at nearby tables. Maya kept her composure, though her stomach tightened. I'm so sorry. What seems to be the problem? The problem. Patricia's voice climbed another octave. The problem is that I gave you very simple, very specific instructions, and clearly you people don't understand the concept of following directions. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. You people. 2 words that carried generations of weight. Maya felt it, that familiar squeeze in her chest, the heat rising to her face. But she'd been trained for difficult customers. She'd dealt with worse. She kept her voice steady. I apologize for any confusion. Can you tell me specifically what's wrong with the dish so I can have the kitchen remake it? What's wrong? Patricia leaned back, gesturing at the plate like it had personally offended her. Everything is wrong. The salmon is overcooked. The vegetables are touching each other. And this, she pointed at a tiny sprig of parsley that sat purely as garnish on the plate's edge, nowhere near the food. I specifically said no garnish. At the table beside them, an elderly couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. A businessman 2 booths over pretended to study his phone while clearly listening. Maya reached for the plate. Let me get you a fresh order right away. No. Patricia's hand shot out, stopping her. I want to speak to your manager. Immediately. Because this level of incompetence is unacceptable. Do you even understand English? Or do I need to explain this to you more slowly? The racist undertone wasn't even subtle anymore. It was right there, naked and vicious. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she lowered the plate back to the table. Our manager is currently handling a delivery issue in the back, but I'm sure I can resolve this. Of course he's busy, Patricia cut her off. Probably dealing with another mistake from someone like you. How do you people even get hired here? What are the standards? In the corner of the dining room, Ernest's mop stopped mid-stroke. He'd been working his way toward the front of the restaurant, practically invisible in his coveralls, but he'd heard every word. He straightened slowly, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. Other customers were shifting in their seats now, some looking away in discomfort, others whispering to their companions. Patricia's son had finally looked up from his tablet, his young face confused and uncomfortable. But Patricia wasn't done. Not even close. What would you do in Maya's situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and stick around, because this story takes an unexpected turn. Patricia stood up. The movement was sudden, aggressive. She rose from her seat like a prosecutor approaching a witness, and suddenly the power dynamic in the room shifted. Maya, still standing beside the table, instinctively took a half-step back. You know what your problem is? Patricia's voice carried through the entire restaurant now, no longer just loud but performing for an audience. Your problem is that you think you can just do the bare minimum and get away with it. Well, not with me. I don't accept mediocrity. Her finger shot out, jabbing toward Maya's face with each word. I asked for something simple. Simple. But apparently, that's too much for someone with your limited skill set. The pause before limited skill set was deliberate, loaded with implication. Maya's hands were shaking now, trembling at her sides. She clasped them together, trying to maintain the composure that was rapidly slipping away. She could feel tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer injustice of standing there, taking this abuse, unable to defend herself without risking her job. "Ma'am, please," Maya started, her voice tight. "Don't ma'am me," Patricia snapped. "You don't get to act respectful now. You should have been respectful when you were in the kitchen, but I guess attention to detail isn't something they teach in your community." The word community dripped with contempt. There was no mistaking her meaning now. At the booth across the aisle, a middle-aged black woman started to rise from her seat, her expression furious. Her husband gently touched her arm, conflicted, wanting to intervene but uncertain how. The elderly couple from before sat frozen, their meals forgotten. The businessman had his phone out now, though whether to record or call someone wasn't clear. Patricia's son had put down his tablet completely. He was staring at his mother with an expression that looked almost like fear, or maybe shame. At 10 years old, he was old enough to recognize that something was very wrong with what his mother was doing. "I want your name," Patricia demanded, jabbing her finger again. "Your full name. Because I'm going to make sure everyone knows how incompetent you are. I'm going to write reviews. I'm going to call corporate. I'm going to make sure." Maya's vision blurred. A single tear escaped down her cheek, and she quickly brushed it away, hating herself for showing any weakness. She'd dealt with difficult customers before. She'd handled complaints and unreasonable demands. But this public humiliation, this barely concealed racism, this assault on her dignity while she stood powerless, it was too much. She opened her mouth, not even sure what she was going to say. Maybe she'd quit right there. Maybe she'd finally tell this woman exactly what she thought. Maybe. In the corner, Ernest set down his mop. The sound of the wooden handle hitting the bucket echoed through the silent restaurant like a gavel. Every eye in the room shifted toward him. This elderly janitor in worn coveralls, who until that moment had been as invisible as wallpaper. He removed his work gloves. One finger at a time. Slowly. Deliberately. Then he started walking. His posture changed with every step. The slight stoop of his shoulders straightened. His head lifted. The tired shuffle of a man who'd been mopping floors all afternoon transformed into something else entirely. The measured, confident stride of someone who'd commanded boardrooms, made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, built something from nothing. Patricia was still talking, still berating Maya, completely unaware that the entire dynamic of the room had shifted. Ernest had seen enough. He'd spent 70 years watching scenes like this play out. People with a little bit of power wielding it like a weapon against those they perceived as beneath them. He'd experienced it himself, more times than he could count. He'd watched his own mother endure it. His wife. His daughter. But this was his restaurant. His community. His employee. And he was done watching. "Excuse me." The words were quiet, almost gentle. But they cut through Patricia's tirade like a blade through silk. The entire restaurant, already tense and silent, seemed to hold its collective breath. Patricia whipped around, her face flushed with anger, ready to annihilate whoever dared interrupt her performance. When she saw the elderly janitor standing there, her expression twisted into something between disgust and disbelief. "What?" she snapped. "Can't you see I'm dealing with incompetent?" "I can see exactly what you're doing," Ernest interrupted, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge of cold steel. "And I think you should know who you're talking to before you say another word." Patricia blinked. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. She glanced at Ernest's coveralls, at the mop bucket still visible in the corner, then back at his face with an expression that said, "Who does this janitor think he is?" "I don't have time for," she started. "Make time," Ernest said quietly. Something in his voice, the authority, the absolute certainty, made Patricia's mouth snap shut. The room was so silent now you could hear the hum of the refrigerators in the kitchen. Ernest reached slowly into the chest pocket of his coveralls. He pulled out a simple business card, its edges slightly worn from being carried close to his heart. He placed it deliberately on the table in front of Patricia, then stepped back, his arms crossed, waiting. Patricia's eyes dropped to the card. For a moment she just stared. Then her face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion to comprehension, comprehension to shock, shock to absolute horror. All the color drained from her cheeks. The card was simple, elegant. It read, "Ernest Blackwell, owner and founder the Golden Terrace." Her hand shot to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Ernest Blackwell. The name wasn't just on a business card, it was on a plaque by the front door, thanking him for 42 years of service to the community. It was in the local newspaper from 2015 when he'd been named Small Business Owner of the Year. It was known by everyone who'd ever truly paid attention to this place. Ernest had started in this very building in 1983, washing dishes for minimum wage. He was 27 years old, newly married, with a baby daughter at home and dreams that seemed impossible. He worked doubles, saved every penny, learned every position in the restaurant. When the original owner wanted to retire in 1995, Ernest bought the place with a loan he spent the next 15 years paying off. He could have expanded, could have franchised, could have sold to a chain and retired rich. Instead, he'd kept the Golden Terrace exactly what it was, a community institution that served good food at fair prices and treated every customer like family. But Ernest had a philosophy, carved into his bones from years of being underestimated and overlooked. Never forget where you came from. Never stop listening to your people. That's why every Tuesday afternoon, without fail, Ernest put on coveralls and mopped his own floors. He bussed tables. He listened to conversations. He watched how his staff was treated. He saw what customers were really like when they thought nobody important was watching. Because he understood something fundamental. The moment you stop seeing the people who work for you, the moment you lose touch with what actually happens in your business, is the moment you failed as a leader. And right now, standing in front of this woman who'd just spent 10 minutes publicly humiliating one of his best employees, Ernest was seeing everything perfectly clear. Patricia's son stared at his mother, his eyes wide. The other customers sat frozen, some with forks halfway to their mouths. Maya stood beside the table, her tears forgotten, watching this elderly man she'd assumed was just the janitor reveal himself as the person who signed her paychecks. Ernest's gaze never left Patricia's face. "Now," he said softly, "would you like to continue telling me about the incompetence in my restaurant?" Can you imagine her face right now? If you're enjoying this story of karma in action, smash that like button. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I didn't. I wasn't. The words tumbled out in fragments, her brain desperately trying to find an escape route that didn't exist. Ernest waited, his expression unchanged. He wasn't rushing to fill the silence. He'd learned long ago that silence was often the most powerful tool in a conversation. "Mr. Blackwell, there's been a misunderstanding," Patricia finally managed. Her voice completely transformed from the commanding tone of minutes before. Now it was small, pleading. The food wasn't. I have very specific dietary requirements and... Stop. Ernest's single word cut through her excuses. Not loud. Not angry. Just final. I heard every word you said to Maya. Every single word. So let's not insult both our intelligence by pretending this was about salmon cooked 4 minutes instead of 5. Patricia flinched as if she'd been slapped. Ernest turned to Maya, his expression softening. Maya has worked here for 8 months. In that time, she's never been late. Never called in sick without a genuine reason. She remembers the regulars' orders without writing them down. She stays late to help the closing shift. She treats every single customer, regardless of who they are or how they treat her, with respect and professionalism. He looked back at Patricia. The food you received was prepared exactly to your specifications. I know because I watched the kitchen prepare it. Your salmon was timed to the second. The vegetables were steamed perfectly. The garnish you complained about was sitting on the edge of the plate, not touching anything, exactly as standard presentation requires. Patricia opened her mouth, but Ernest raised a hand. But this was never about the food, was it? His voice remained calm, measured, but there was a weight to his words now. This was about you having a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, and deciding that someone you perceived as powerless was a safe target for your frustration. He paused, letting that sink in. What made it worse, what made it unforgivable, was that you didn't just criticize the service. You made it personal. You made it about who Maya is. You people. Your community. Limited skill set. We all heard it. We all understood what you meant. Patricia's son was staring at the table now, his face burning red. At 10 years old, he understood shame, even if he didn't fully grasp all the implications of what his mother had done. I've been on the receiving end of that kind of language my entire life, Ernest continued, his voice carrying the weight of 70 years of experience. I've had people assume I was the janitor when I was the owner. I've had people speak to me the way you just spoke to Maya, like I was less than human, less than worthy of basic respect. And I'll tell you what I learned. How you treat people when you think they can't fight back tells me everything about who you really are. He straightened, his decision made. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my restaurant right now. You're not welcome back. Not today. Not ever. And I'm going to trust that you'll use this as a teaching moment for your son about how we don't treat other human beings. Patricia's face cycled through emotions. Humiliation, anger, desperation. Please, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Yes, you did, Ernest said quietly. That's the problem. You meant every word until you realized there would be consequences. He gestured toward the door. It's time for you to go. Patricia grabbed her designer handbag with trembling hands. Her son scrambled out of the booth, keeping his eyes down. As they walked toward the exit, the silence in the restaurant was absolute, until the door chimed behind them. Then someone started clapping. It was the middle-aged black woman who'd wanted to intervene earlier. She rose from her booth, applauding steadily. The elderly couple joined in. Then the businessman. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet, applauding. Not for Patricia's humiliation, but for Ernest's dignity, for Maya's grace under fire, for justice quietly served. Maya stood frozen, tears streaming down her face now. Not tears of shame, but of relief, of validation, of being seen and defended. Ernest walked over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Take 5 minutes in the back, he said softly. Compose yourself. And when you're ready, come find me in my office. I think we need to talk about that shift supervisor position that just opened up. And a raise. Maya nodded, unable to speak, and headed toward the back. The applause continued as Ernest turned to address the other customers, thanking them for their patience and offering dessert on the house. In that moment, the Golden Terrace was more than just a restaurant. It was exactly what Ernest had always intended it to be. A place where everyone mattered, where dignity was non-negotiable, and where justice, when necessary, was served with the same care as the food. Word spread fast in a neighborhood like this. By that evening, 3 different customers had posted about the incident on community Facebook groups. Not to shame Patricia publicly, Ernest had made it clear he didn't want a witch hunt, but to praise how the situation had been handled. The story rippled outward through the neighborhood like stones dropped in still water. Patricia herself disappeared from local circles. The book club she'd attended stopped seeing her. The yoga studio where she'd made a show of her membership didn't renew her account when it expired. Her son, according to one neighbor who knew the family, had apparently asked his father, who'd left 3 weeks before, if he could stay with him full-time. The boy had witnessed something that fundamentally shifted how he saw his mother, and at 10 years old, he was learning a harder lesson than most kids his age: that the people who raise you aren't always right, and sometimes their pain turns them into people you don't recognize. For Maya, everything changed. She accepted the shift supervisor position and the raise that came with it. But more than that, something shifted inside her. The young woman who'd stood trembling while being berated discovered she was stronger than she'd known. She started speaking up more in staff meetings. She enrolled in additional business courses. Ernest began mentoring her personally, teaching her not just about running a restaurant but about leadership, dignity, and standing firm in your values. 6 months later, a new photograph appeared on the wall of the Golden Terrace. It showed the entire staff gathered around the front entrance, smiling. Ernest stood in the center in his coveralls, one arm around Maya, who wore the navy blue shirt of a supervisor. The photo carried a small plaque, "The Golden Terrace Family, 2025. Ernest still mopped floors every Tuesday. "The moment you separate yourself from the people who make your business run," he explained to a reporter from the local paper who'd heard about the incident, "is the moment you lose sight of what matters. I need to know how my staff is treated. I need to hear what customers say when they think nobody important is listening. Leadership isn't about sitting in an office. It's about being present." The regulars rallied around Maya in the weeks that followed. Mrs. Chen, who came in every Thursday for the early bird special, started requesting Maya's section specifically. The Lopez family brought her a card signed by all 4 of their kids. Old Mr. Patterson, a retired teacher who'd been eating at the Golden Terrace since 1989, told her quietly one afternoon, "I've seen a lot of young people come through here. You're going to do great things." But the story resonated beyond just one neighborhood restaurant. It touched on something deeper, something millions of service workers experience but rarely see addressed. According to a recent study, nearly 80% of restaurant workers report experiencing verbal abuse from customers. For workers of color, that number climbs higher, with many reporting discriminatory treatment as a regular occurrence rather than an exception. The phrase, "the customer is always right," has created a culture where service workers are expected to absorb abuse as part of the job description. Ernest understood this intimately. He'd lived it. And he'd built the Golden Terrace on a different principle. Respect flows both ways, and dignity is non-negotiable. "We serve food here," he told his staff during a meeting a week after the incident. "But more importantly, we serve our community. And that community includes every person who works in this building. You're not less important than the customers. You're not beneath anyone. And in my restaurant, you will be treated with the respect you deserve." The Golden Terrace continued serving its neighborhood, exactly as it had for 42 years. But now everyone who worked there knew, really knew, that when it mattered most, they wouldn't stand alone. This story isn't really about a janitor who turned out to be an owner. It's about something much more fundamental. It's about how we treat people when we think nobody's watching. How we speak to those we perceive as powerless. How assumptions based on someone's uniform or position or skin color reveal more about us than about them. Ernest Blackwell understood something that took him 70 years and a lifetime of experiences to fully articulate. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. The housekeeping staff, the delivery driver, the person serving your coffee. They all have dreams, struggles, families, hopes. The moment you forget that, the moment you treat someone as less than human because of what they do or how they look, you've lost something essential in yourself. Patricia learned this lesson the hard way. But the truth is, versions of the scene play out every single day across America, usually without an owner in coveralls to intervene. Service workers absorb abuse, swallow their dignity, and smile through treatment that would be unacceptable in any other context, all because they need the job, need the tips, need to survive. Maya is thriving now. She's studying business management at the State University, taking night classes while working full-time as assistant manager at the Golden Terrace. Ernest meets with her every week, sharing 4 decades of hard-won wisdom about leadership, integrity, and building something that matters. She's talking about opening her own place someday, and Ernest has already told her he'll be her first investor. The Golden Terrace is still there on the corner of Martin Luther Street and Fifth Avenue. Still serving the neighborhood. Still treating every customer like family and every employee like they matter. The photographs on the walls keep multiplying. New memories, new celebrations, new proof that some places are about more than just business. And every Tuesday afternoon, you can still find Ernest in his coveralls, mopping the floors with the same methodical care he's shown for years. He's 70 years old now, wealthy enough to retire a dozen times over, but he shows up anyway. Because leadership isn't about the corner office. It's about being present. It's about seeing people. It's about standing up when it matters. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody notices, until they need to be noticed. If this story moved you, please share it. These are the stories that need to be told. Subscribe for more real-life tales of justice and humanity. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed something like this? How did you handle it? Your voice matters. Your story matters. Because we all have the power to be Ernest in someone else's story. We just have to choose to use it.